My son's text appeared at exactly 11:02 p.m., like a hammer to my chest. Mom, you won't be joining us. Tanya wants this trip to be just her family. You've already done your part by paying. I sat at my kitchen table, the faint hum of the fridge the only sound in the dark house. My hands still sticky from taping little Aloha-themed bags I'd made for the grandkids, each labeled with their names. Inside were tiny keychains, one for each child, and a note from me. My heart sank as I stared at the glowing screen. Another message came in. Don't take this personally, Mom. We just want it simple. Really. I didn't reply. I didn't even want to move. I just sat there, letting the quiet sink into my bones, the betrayal sharper than I had imagined. For years, I had been building this trip, a dream. Hawaii was more than sand and sun. It was a promise. A promise I made after my husband, James, passed, that I would bring our children and grandchildren to the place we had first fallen in love. Every tiny detail was my labor of love. Villa reservations, excursions, luau tickets, airport transfers, even soft beds for Tanya's mother. Every penny in the travel fund had been saved carefully. Tutoring at night, selling old furniture, skipping luxuries, $21,763.84 in total, earned with sacrifice and care. Yet, here I was, excluded. Not by accident, not by mistake, but by deliberate choice. My son had followed his wife's lead, and I was suddenly invisible in the family I had raised. I remembered the small things, the way Tanya corrected me in front of the children, how she hosted holidays at her mother's house without a word, how she subtly erased my place in every family gathering. But I had clung to the hope that Nathan would see me, remember the pink tulips he used to bring me, the cards he wrote that made me cry with pride. Surely, he couldn't truly forget what I had given him, what I had been for him. I looked at my suitcase, still packed with my sundresses, a photo of James, and a small lavender candle I planned to light on the beach in his memory. I imagined my grandson asking, "Did Grandpa love the ocean?" And I would have smiled. He loved it so much, he brought me here. But it wouldn't happen now. I let the ache sit. Shame washed over me first. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet, deep shame for hoping. And then clarity began to seep in. I realized something crucial. I had built a dream for people who were only using me as a wallet. Their love, it seemed, was conditional, but my trust, my care, my money, I still controlled those. I opened the laptop, navigated to the travel fund account, and there it was. All linked payments, all ready to be withdrawn automatically, all under my name. 6 cards tied to one source, mine. I hovered over the freeze account button. One click could stop every charge, halt every plan. Yet I paused. I didn't want to act on anger. Not yet. I wanted to make sure the silence I imposed would be felt in its full weight. Instead, I opened a blank document and began writing a new list. Women I knew, women who had been overlooked for years. Carol, Louise, Frances, Beverly. Women whose contributions to their families had gone unnoticed, whose lives had been quiet and underappreciated. My heart lifted slightly as I imagined a new plan, one where generosity was matched with gratitude. I placed the souvenir bags for the grandkids back in the cupboard. I left the candle on the counter thinking about all the dreams I'd carefully saved, and I smiled. Not out of revenge, but because for the first time in years, I realized the truth. I didn't have to be the giver to those who took without care. I could choose who deserved my love and attention. That night, I slept. Not in peace, exactly, but in a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in years. They were planning a vacation without me. But I had a choice, and that choice was mine alone. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not because I had plans, but because my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The house was quiet, the way it always was before anyone else stirred, but the silence felt heavier now. Nathan's text still lingered in my head. "You've already done your part by paying." I walked slowly to my desk, made tea, and opened my laptop again. The travel fund account was still there, humming quietly in its corner of the screen. $21,763.84. Every dollar a story of patience, sacrifice, and hope. Each linked card ready to serve them if I chose. And that was the moment I realized I had the power. Not the power to punish, not the power to shame, but the power to reclaim what had been mine all along. They could exclude me, pretend I didn't exist, but they couldn't take my control. I hovered over the Freeze All Transactions button, feeling the weight of that single decision. One click would halt every hotel payment, every excursion, every airline charge. One click, and the vacation they assumed was theirs would evaporate like morning mist. Before I acted, I thought about all the tiny moments of erasure that had led to this point. Holidays without me, photos cropped so my face didn't appear, Tanya quietly taking over birthdays, Nathan brushing it off with a casual, "Oh, Mom, you're not into that stuff." Not true. I had been a part of their lives, but slowly, silently, I had been written out of the story. I could feel anger simmering beneath the surface, but I didn't touch the button yet. First, I needed to plan. I opened a fresh document and began writing down names. Names of women like me, women who had been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly dismissed. Carol, who hadn't left the state in 20 years. Louise, who lost her husband last winter. Frances, who raised her grandchildren but never saw them graduate. Beverly, who never had a family photograph on the beach. Nora, whose birthday never mattered to anyone else. I smiled as the list grew. These women deserved more than crumbs of attention, more than invisible seats at the table. I envisioned a trip where they could laugh without performing, where their stories mattered simply because they existed. And slowly, the anger began to melt into something stronger: clarity, determination, purpose. By mid-afternoon, I opened the account again. 6 linked cards, all tied to my name. The freeze button waited. I didn't press it yet, not because I doubted my decision, but because timing mattered. I wanted them to feel the consequences quietly, to understand that control comes with responsibility. I imagined Nathan at the airport, scanning cards that no longer worked, realizing that money alone doesn't make a family whole. Still, I didn't act impulsively. Instead, I began imagining a different trip entirely, one where the people around me mattered because they chose love and presence, not entitlement. I started drafting itineraries, looking up villas and excursions for my chosen companions. The thought of 6 women, finally seen, finally celebrated, brought warmth to my chest I hadn't felt in years. Later, Tanya called. The voice was cheerful but clipped, an effort to mask tension. "We've got everything handled, Marilyn. You don't need to bring anything, really." I listened quietly, sipping my tea, nodding to the empty kitchen. The finality in her tone was clear. They had decided I wasn't part of their story. And that was fine. Not because I gave up, but because I finally understood that my love didn't have to be taken for granted to be valuable. By evening, I clicked the freeze button. The screen confirmed, all linked transactions paused. Manual authorization required. Silence followed. The choice had been made, not in anger, not for revenge, but for clarity. They would discover it in their own time. I went to the closet, unpacked the little souvenir bags I had prepared, and held each keychain in my hands, tiny symbols of the love they no longer appreciated. And then I smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't reaching for validation. I wasn't hoping for recognition. I was creating a new story, a story where my generosity was matched with gratitude, where presence was chosen, not assumed. That night, I sat with my tea by the window, staring at the stars. The wind whispered through the trees, gentle and insistent. I whispered back, "This time, I choose who I love. This time, I choose who sees me."
And in that quiet moment, I started planning the vacation that was truly mine. A trip where no one would erase me, where memories would be built not on expectation, but on mutual respect, where love wouldn't come with a price tag, and presence would never be optional.
By the next morning, I had made a decision. The money in my travel fund wasn't just numbers on a screen anymore. It was a tool to create a story I controlled, one that celebrated people who mattered, who had given without recognition, who had quietly carried the weight of life without applause. I picked up my phone and began calling the women on my list. Each call felt like opening a door that had been closed for too long. "Marilyn, is that really you?" Carol asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, dear," I said softly. "I want to take you somewhere. Hawaii, for a week. No expectations, no chores, no apologies required. Just you, me, and a few friends who need this as much as you do." There was silence on the line. Then laughter. Then tears. You're serious?" Beverly asked. "You mean we get to go?" "Yes," I said. "Pack a bag. We leave in 2 weeks." I could hear disbelief melting into gratitude. These were women who had been overlooked for decades, whose contributions had been invisible. I had given them the chance to be seen, really seen, for the first time in years. I spent the next days making bookings under my own name. I arranged the villa with enough space for all of us, a large table where no one would be pushed aside, rooms with views of the ocean, soft beds for nights of rest, and a kitchen stocked for meals we would prepare together. I even packed my husband's framed photograph, intending to place him at the center of our gatherings, not as a ghost of the past, but as a reminder of love that endures. The morning we left, I watched as each woman arrived, suitcases in hand, eyes wide with excitement and disbelief. Carol couldn't stop smiling. Beverly whispered, "I can't believe this is real." And Frances laughed so hard she nearly dropped her bag. They had been invisible for so long that this experience, this acknowledgement, seemed almost impossible. Once we were settled in, I handed out the keychains I had originally prepared for my grandchildren, one for each of them. "A little something to remind you that you're valued," I said. Their eyes sparkled with gratitude. We spent the days exploring the beaches, laughing under the sun, telling stories that had never had an audience before. We snorkeled in crystal-clear waters, hiked trails that revealed hidden waterfalls, and attended luau's where we danced not to impress anyone, but because our hearts demanded it. At night, we gathered around a fire pit. I placed James's photograph at the center, lit the candle, and for the first time, I didn't feel the absence of my family. I felt the presence of a family I had chosen, one that loved and saw me without condition. Each woman shared stories they had never told anyone. Nora spoke about the loneliness of feeling invisible in her own home. Louise recalled memories of her husband with tears and laughter, reliving moments that had gone unnoticed. Beverly recounted her years caring for a sick brother and how she'd never been thanked. And I listened, giving them my full attention, offering them the presence they deserved. There were moments of quiet reflection, too. Walking along the shore at sunset, the sand cool beneath our feet, I realized something powerful. Love isn't measured in gestures or gifts. It's measured in recognition, in shared moments, in the act of seeing someone fully and choosing to value them. I thought about Nathan and Tanya, about the way they had taken my generosity for granted. And for the first time, I felt neither anger nor sadness. Their choices were theirs, but mine had led me here, to laughter, to joy, to a group of women who finally understood each other. They had assumed my silence meant compliance, my kindness meant weakness, but they had forgotten one thing. I was the keeper of my own story. By the third night, we had a ritual. Each of us lit a candle, one by one, placed beside James's photograph, and spoke a word or memory we wanted to hold on to. Peace, strength, gratitude, visibility. And in those flames, I felt a release, a letting go of years of expectation, of unreturned effort, of being erased. On the final evening, we walked along the shore, collecting seashells, our footprints marking the sand, a temporary signature of our presence. I realized then that this was what family could be when chosen, not assumed. No one demanded my compliance. No one dictated my joy.
We had built something unbreakable from the ashes of disappointment. And while my son and his family flew thousands of miles away, I had discovered a greater one right here. One built from recognition, respect, and shared love.
The last morning in Hawaii arrived soft and golden. The sky was the color of early peach, and the ocean whispered a gentle rhythm against the sand. I watched the 6 women move about the villa with ease, their laughter light, unguarded. It was the sound of people finally allowed to belong, finally permitted to take up space without apology. I sat on the balcony with my tea, James's photograph beside me, and thought about the journey that had led us here. Not the flight bookings, the carefully packed bags, or the sunscreen bottles I had painstakingly organized years ago. Not even the heartbreak of being excluded by my own son. No, this journey had always been about recognition, about finally choosing to see the people who had given so much and had never been seen. Carol appeared beside me, her scarf catching the wind. "Marilyn," she said softly, "I don't know how to thank you." I smiled. "You don't need to. Just being here, for each other, that's enough." We spent the morning collecting shells along the shoreline, small treasures to take home as reminders. Each woman chose one and held it tightly in her hand. It wasn't just a souvenir. It was a symbol of reclaiming their own stories, a memory carved out of time for themselves rather than anyone else. Back at the villa, we had our last breakfast together. The table was crowded, overflowing with fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee. But the real feast was in the conversation, in the shared glances of understanding. I listened as Frances recalled a Christmas when she had cooked for everyone alone, feeling invisible. Beverly told of nights spent soothing a brother who didn't know how to say thank you. And as they spoke, I realized this. These stories, their lives, mattered. And now they would matter even more, carried forward by the memory of a week that had been theirs. I thought briefly of Nathan, of the text messages, the voicemails, the emails asking for the money back. And I felt a quiet relief that I hadn't responded. They had assumed that love meant compliance, that kindness meant I would absorb every slight without protest. They had believed they could erase me with a message, a preference, a selfish decision. But I had learned something invaluable. Love does not exist in silence when your heart has boundaries. Generosity is not surrender. By the time our plane left, the villa had been emptied, the beds made, the lights turned off. But something remained behind, unspoken, unbreakable. The laughter, the stories, the presence of women who had been overlooked for far too long. They had carried this moment into the world, and in doing so, they had given me the most precious gift, confirmation that I mattered, not to them alone, but to myself. When I returned home, the quiet house welcomed me. James's photograph on the mantel caught the sunlight in the afternoon, his smile unchanging, his presence alive in memory. I unpacked my suitcase slowly, placing the seashells on the windowsill, each one a reminder that sometimes family is chosen, sometimes love is built on shared acknowledgement rather than obligation. The travel fund, once a source of stress and betrayal, now felt like freedom. I could have reclaimed it for myself, for indulgences, for comfort. But instead, I had used it to create joy, to recognize those who deserved it, to honor memory in a tangible, life-affirming way. That's when I realized something profound. Generosity is most powerful when it is informed by wisdom. Love without boundaries can be exploited. Kindness without recognition can be erased. But love that knows its own value, that becomes a legacy. I never received an apology from Nathan or Tanya. There was no acknowledgement of their mistake beyond a cautious, calculated email. But I didn't need it. Healing did not come from their recognition. It came from my actions, my choices, my decision to honor myself and the women who had never been honored. Later that evening, I walked along the shore near our home. The tide lapped at my feet and the sky glimmered with stars, each one small yet undeniable. I thought about my grandchildren, about the family I had once longed to reconnect with, and I realized something even deeper. My love for them didn't have to be conditional on their acknowledgement.
Love could exist without approval. Memory could be sacred without validation. And presence could be powerful, even unseen. In the following weeks, I wrote letters to each of the women who had joined me in Hawaii. Not just a thank you, but a record of the week we shared, a tangible reminder that they mattered. I planned small gatherings, weekend trips, dinners by the water. These were the moments that would become their stories, our stories. And for the first time in decades, I felt free to build a legacy not dependent on anyone else's approval. A family made not by birth alone, but by choice, respect, and shared joy. And so, as I closed the journal I kept beside the window, I whispered softly, to no one in particular. I was never lost. I was simply finding the ones worth traveling toward.